provide comments. Thank you. You will be able to provide comments in the chat or by unmuting at various times during the session. There will also be an opportunity to provide additional comments after the session. I would ask that you please remain on mute until you are prompted to make a comment. We greatly appreciate that. So if you're able to mute at this time, we would appreciate it. And also, I'd just like to note, if you look at the slide that's currently on the screen, we do have a Spanish interpretation line. And if you just use this information and call in, there is the access code, and you should be able to access the line. Next slide, please. Joining me on today's call, we have our MDAR team. We do have Commissioner John LeBeau on the call. I am Ashley Randall. I serve as the Deputy Commissioner at the department. We have Carrie Corman, who is our grants manager, Colin Roberts, our CFO, Rosa Ruda, who oversees our environmental justice program and efforts at the department, Rebecca Davidson from our agricultural markets team, as well as David Weber from our agricultural markets team. So thank you to everyone from MDAR for helping with this. Next slide, please. For today's session, we're really looking at this as an exploratory exercise. We're looking to obtain feedback from stakeholders on the call that represent a broad range of sectors and business models, from processors and farmers to distributors. As we're beginning to prepare our LFPA grant application, this is really the first step in the process to hear directly from the ag community and our Massachusetts stakeholders. We'd really like to learn and flesh out a little bit more what the focus areas are of our mass food system stakeholders and what's most critical to you at this time. It's really an opportunity, given the past 2 years and looking at the pandemic and how our food system and supply chain has changed, of how we can best support the industries across the food system and make sure that it's done so in an equitable and fair manner. We're also going today to respond to pre-submitted questions. Thank you to many of you that sent us questions beforehand, and we will do our best to get to those questions throughout the session. And if there are any questions that remain, we will follow up with attendees afterwards. And also, we'd just like to update you on the grant process and what that looks like through the USDA LFPA program and our next steps after today's session. I'll now turn it over to Rebecca for our agenda.
Thank you, Ashley. I'd like to give a brief overview of today's agenda. We're going to start with program background, outlining our USDA goals. We hope to not take too much time with that to leave enough time for questions and all of your comments. We'll then move into the topic-based comment period. So as Ashley said, I want to thank you all for the comments that you sent in via the registration form. We received close to 50 comments, and your comments helped guide the structure of today's listening session. In the interest of time and to maintain a good flow of discussion, we organized your comments into topics. Each topic has a set amount of time associated with it based on the number of comments that we received for that topic. The topics that were identified through the comments were topic 1, project partners, eligibility, selection criteria. And if one of my team members could please put the comments of the topics in the chat, that would be great. Thank you. Topic 2, product purchasing, structure and priorities. Topic 3, contracting with socially disadvantaged farmers. Topic 4, program spending. Topic 5, the Farmers to Families Food Box Program. Topic 6, distribution. Topic 7, outreach and awareness. And for each topic, we'll review the comments that were provided in advance and then open up for additional comments as time will allow. And after this topic-based comment period, there will be an additional 25 minutes for open-ended comments. So we ask that you please hold your comment for the appropriate section of our listening session or for the open-ended section so that everything runs smoothly. A reminder that this session is recorded and to use the chat feature if you're more comfortable doing so. We will have team members available to read out your comments. Please keep your comments to 30 seconds in the interest in hearing as many voices as possible during this session. And also please put yourself on mute unless you are prompted to make a comment. And we'll provide a link to a follow-up survey at the end of the session for you to submit any additional comments. And I will now turn it over to Ashley to review the program background and USDA goals.
Thank you, Rebecca. So in looking at the Local Food Purchase Assistance Program, the main purpose of this program is to maintain and improve food and agricultural supply chain resiliency through non-competitive cooperative agreements to state and federally recognized tribal governments. The state and tribal governments will enter into non-competitive cooperative agreements with USDA for the purchase of local domestic food targeting socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers to be distributed targeting underserved communities. And this is authorized and funded under Section 1001B4 of the American Rescue Plan Act. Next slide, please. And really, there's three overarching goals when we look at this program and at the opportunity. To strengthen the local and regional food system is the first one. And this is something that we've really looked at the department over the last 2 years as well, with heightened attention on the areas of our local food system that face challenges. And as many of you may be aware, one of those outcomes of that was the Food Security Task Force and recommendations from the task force that look at our food supply chain and continue to figure out ways to strengthen the supply chain. And this really aligns with that. The second goal is to help support local and socially disadvantaged farmers and producers through building and expanding economic opportunities. This is really a key focus area of this program and of the opportunity. And at the department, it's something we're very keenly aware of and want to make sure that throughout this process, that stays at the top as one of our overarching goals. And then the third goal is to establish, strengthen, and broaden partnerships with producers and the food distribution community, local food networks, and nonprofits distributing fresh and nutritious foods in rural, remote, or underserved communities. And that's something, again, we have so many partners and so much collaboration across the food system in Massachusetts already in place. So we're very fortunate that we have that model already, but it's something we're looking to build upon throughout this program and to hear from you today again on how we can strengthen those partnerships with our application to USDA. Next slide, please. So when we look at the definitions of the program, and this was raised in some of the questions we received, how are local or regional producers defined? So when we look at local or regional producers, these are farmers, ranchers, producers, processors, or distributors, and other businesses involved in food production or distribution that are located in the state or tribal region or within 400 miles of the delivery destination. And please note these definitions are from USDA, so many of you may be familiar with them already, and for some, this may be the first time that you're seeing these. Another definition that we look at is a local or regional food. Locally and regionally produced food means food that is raised, produced, aggregated, stored, processed, and distributed in the locality or region where the final product is marketed to consumers, so that the total distance that the product travels between the farm or ranch where the product originates and the point of sale to the end consumer is at most 400 miles, or both the final market and the origin of the product are within the same state, territory, or tribal land. So when we look at our application development, we're looking at that 400-mile radius, but really we're looking within Massachusetts and how we can best support Massachusetts farmers, producers, and distributors. Next slide, please. Another definition that is raised is domestic food. So an agricultural commodity means a product grown, processed, and otherwise prepared for sale or distribution exclusively in the United States or its territories, except with respect to minor ingredients. So we have received several questions on this as well about the eligibility of various sectors to participate in the program. And I will state that it is very broad because it can range from dairy to aquaculture or any products here in the Commonwealth, including value-added products, as long as they are grown within the United States or produced or processed. So it is a very broad definition, which gives us some flexibility with the program and the ability to benefit more individuals through this program. Next slide, please. Socially disadvantaged producers. Socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher is a farmer or rancher who is a member of a socially disadvantaged group. So to break that down a little bit more, USDA defines a socially disadvantaged group as a group whose members have been subject to discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, age, disability, and where applicable, sex, marital status, familial status, parental status, religion, sexual orientation, genetic information, political beliefs, reprisal, or because all or a part of an individual's income is derived from any public assistance program. So for socially disadvantaged groups, this is the definition that we will be working with throughout this program development. Next slide, please. Underserved communities, that's really who we're looking to target in terms of the distribution through the LFPA program. And in underserved communities are those defined in accordance with Executive Order 13985, Executive Order on Advancing Racial Equity with Support for Underserved Communities. And as I said earlier, we're really looking at this program through an equity lens. So when we defined equity, it means the consistent and systemic, fair, just, and impartial treatment, systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals, including individuals who belong to underserved communities that have been denied such treatment, such as Black, Latino, and Indigenous and Native American persons, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders and other persons of color, members of religious minorities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer persons, persons with disabilities, persons who live in rural areas, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality. So as we develop our application and as we hear from all of you today on the call, we are taking an equity lens in our program development and how we can benefit and serve those underserved communities, as well as work with socially disadvantaged farmers. Next slide, please. To go over some program background and USDA goals, the procurement process, as I mentioned earlier, is through the state. So the state and tribal governments will procure domestic, local foods from local farmers and ranchers. As I mentioned also, we are taking the lead on this application in conjunction with our other partners at state agencies such as DTA, DESI, and DPH. Targeted purchases from socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers to expand existing local food networks is really the priority of this program. And the documented procurement procedures must be in place and consistent with applicable state, local, and tribal laws and regulations. When we look at distribution, as we mentioned, we'll distribute the food within Massachusetts in a region targeting underserved communities. Distribution to communities not normally served through traditional food distribution networks is encouraged by USDA and will be the focus of our application. Next slide, please. Program funding. So $400 million was allocated to the 50 states, US territories, and federally recognized tribal governments. There is a 2-year period of performance from the time of award. So awards are anticipated this year in 2022 and will be fulfilled by the end of 2024. The Section 2.5 of the RFA, or Request for Applications, includes a table with the allocation available by state or territory, and that link is here on the screen. And Massachusetts is set to receive $7.5 million towards this program. And the allocations are based on the TFAP formula, which is the Emergency Food Assistance Program. Next slide, please. Moving on to our topic areas, we have topic 1, which is project partners, eligibility, and selection criteria. And we did receive several questions on this. So I just wanted to start with some background information that's pulled directly from the LFPA application process and announcement. So states do have the flexibility to work with different organizations to implement the goals of the grant. So a state agency typically will take the lead on the application, and from there, they can collaborate and partner with farmers and organizations and businesses throughout the state, as long as the goals of the grant are met. Collaborators can be private or public, for-profit, or nonprofit entities. Organizations should show evidence of existing community or industry support and engagement. And states are given the flexibility to explore a variety of models to distribute funds. Next slide, please. And I'd also just like to mention that we have, as Rebecca noted, allotted time to each of these sections. So we'll try to stay on track just to maintain that. So we have about 15 minutes to explore this topic area. And these were some of the questions that we received from participants prior to today's listening session. So as I mentioned, the first question here, what types of organizations will be identifying or working with farmers to source the produce? It's very broad. So the organizations that we may work with or partner with throughout this may be buy local organizations or advocacy organizations that are working with farms, distributors, processors, any farms across the space in Massachusetts. So the program gives us the flexibility and is very broad. So we can partner with one organization or several organizations across the space. And again, we will try to work with as many individuals so we can reach as many underserved communities and individuals as possible. In regards to the second question, how would any funding flow to local farms? Would they have to apply? Could a town's government or the local agricultural commission receive funding? So in terms of how funding would flow to local farms, we're still exploring different models through an RFR process of whether it may be a regional model. So there may be several contracts that are available to organizations across the state. And I would say we would encourage collaboration and to expand upon that partnership we've really seen in the mass food system in the last few years, and how that's strengthened so much due to the pandemic and looking to rely on other partners in the ag community. So, and as an example, there may be one award for Western Mass or the central part of the state given to an organization, and they've identified several local farms across the space in that region that they're going to work with. And they would submit that proposal. And as we said, we'd like to have all the details outlined in those applications when we receive them. But identifying farms that you may work with, processors, value-added organizations, and the distributors is one component. So the funding could flow to a local farm, through that entity that applies to the department to take the lead for the region or for a sector of the state. The next question, what will the state's commitment to racial equity in contracting look like? So as we mentioned earlier, this program really, we're taking a focus on it through an equity lens and ensuring that throughout the application process and the procurement process, that it's done so in a fair and equitable way, and that the focus really is on socially disadvantaged farmers, producers, processors, distributors, and businesses across the state, and making this a fair opportunity for them and for all individuals in the mass food system. So when we develop an RFR, we will be looking in those applications that we receive for the individuals that are applying to demonstrate the equity lens that they are putting on their application. So how many farms, how many businesses, how many producers are you working with from socially disadvantaged groups, as well as what underserved communities are you going to reach? So that is a priority of the program and a large focus in this application process. The next question, which is similar, how much value will be attached to the distribution partners, race, socioeconomic, community demographics? So again, as you may be familiar, at the department and across our secretariat, we really have a commitment to environmental justice, and we've been developing policies and programs through an EJ lens. And throughout our grant programs, we've instituted that as one of the criteria. So whenever we review applications or programs at the department, we have that equity lens and that EJ focus in mind all the time. It's one of our guiding lights, as we like to say at the department. And with this process, it will be similar. So there isn't a certain value attached to it, but I can say that it is prioritized, and especially for this program, because that's the overarching goal. And we want to make sure that we meet that goal through the procurement process and as we move forward with administering the program. The last point, a profile of successful grant applications, what not to do. I would suggest that this is something we follow up afterwards, because we do offer one-on-one technical assistance and conversations with farmers or anyone across the food system that's interested in learning more about grant writing and our programs. So we're happy to follow up after this to address that question. Next slide, please. Topic 2, product purchasing, structure, and priorities. And I will say, I'm just happy at this time, if we have some time, any questions. I don't see any in the chat, but if anyone has any questions, as a reminder, please put those in the chat.
We do, Ashley, we do have a few minutes left for topic 1. If anybody had a question, they could use the raise hand feature in Zoom, or they could put something in the chat. I can't see the chat very well myself, so I don't know if questions come in, but if they do, let us know.
This is Carrie. We have about 6 minutes for questions, and we do have one question in the chat, and it's from Catherine. While the goal would be to utilize funds to benefit as many Massachusetts local eligible partners, given the definition of local by USDA as 400 miles, how does MDAR plan to work with regional states? Is there an opportunity to work with NERO in identifying partners? I could see this being advantageous as neighboring states may want to purchase Massachusetts local goods as well. And then there's a follow-up, but I'll let you answer that, Ashley.
Sure, and thank you, Catherine, for both joining us and for the question. So in regards to this, we will be talking with our neighboring states and our partners at the other state agencies across the New England region. We do have a great relationship with them, and we want to make sure that not only are our programs equitable, but also that we're reaching a broad sector and giving opportunities, as you said, that 400-mile range. So we will be talking as we work to develop the RFR process and our application with those neighboring New England states and partners to determine if there are products or if there's a sector or a need that's unmet that we can't serve, that maybe another state is able to assist. So we would encourage not only those Massachusetts collaboration and partnerships, but the New England region, so we can strengthen not only our mass food supply chain and food system, but the New England region as well.
And then Catherine had a little bit more. How will product availability, variety, and client choice be considered in the selection process? Ensuring that purchasing is aligned with the client and consumer needs is important. Thank you, Catherine, for your question and comment.
So I will say that today's listening session will help inform that. We have received some different questions about not only ethnic crops, but specialized crops or specialized products, depending on different demographics and populations. So when we're looking at proposals from either one entity, or if these are joint applications and partnerships in a region or across the state, we will want to look at the availability and the variety, so we know who we're serving and what will come of those distribution methods to underserved communities. Because certainly we don't want to accept an application or award an application if it's not meeting what the community needs are across the state.
Thanks, Ashley. We have a question from Amy. Is there a way for an individual qualifying farmer to connect with the groups that will be applying for the grant to distribute the food?
Thank you, Amy, for your question. So to that, I would say we are hoping to build a network, and certainly in different parts of the state, and we're happy to follow up with you afterwards to learn a little bit more about where you're based out of, if we can help make those connections. But I think from a regional perspective, there are different organizations that may serve as the lead on this, whether it's a buy local organization connecting value-added processors and distributors with farmers across the space, and really different organizations in different regions of the state have those connections. So we work with the different commodity groups, as well as buy locals, nonprofits, the food banks and food pantries across the state. So I would say if you want to follow up afterwards and we can learn a little bit more about where you're located in the state and your business, we're happy to make those connections.
We have about 2 minutes left for this topic if anybody would like to ask any additional questions.
I also wanted to quickly mention how to use the raise hand feature. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see a button that says reactions. And on that, when you click on that button, there should be an option to select raise hand. And then once your hand is raised, we will be able to call on folks in the order that they raise their hands. Thank you.
We have a question from Tessa. Will part of the grant be used to ensure these connections last past the 2 years of the grant?
So as we're developing our application to USDA, as well as what we'll be looking for from organizations that may want to participate in the program, I do think we want to look at a long-term focus. For really the first year of the pandemic, there was a lot of pivoting and adaptation that we've talked about. I think pivot was the word of 2020. And then last year, looking at food system resiliency. And I really think this program is a part of it. If we can make those connections across the food space, if we can benefit more producers, socially disadvantaged farmers, and members of the mass ag community and the New England region, as well as strengthen those partnerships and make those connections, it will only benefit the entire state and our stakeholders going forward and foster that growth of our mass food system. So as part of the process, I would say that a long-term focus would also be emphasized as we're looking to put these models in place, not only for 2 years, but to continue on in the future.
We had one more question from David. David, I'm going to save your question for the open comment period, and we will make sure that we address your question.
Thank you, Carrie. And again, we will be doing that post survey as well from the session. And so we'd love to hear more comments and feedback. There's a lot of topics to cover today. We want to make sure we share as much information as possible. So understanding what communications are needed or what connections in your area, going back to Amy's earlier question and how may we be able to support that at the department is key to our understanding as we develop the application. We also are interested in understanding the barriers to those individuals that might be participating in the program, whether it's learning who a distributor is in your region or who might be taking the lead on a proposal to the department, and how we can best assist you in that process. Next slide, please. So when we look at product purchasing, the structure and priorities, this is topic 2. And a little bit of background for this topic. All food purchase must meet the definition of domestically produced as well as the definition of local that we talked about at the beginning. The predominance of the awarded funds should be on food purchases. So of that 7.5 million that the state will receive, the majority of that funding will go directly to the purchase of food. And as I mentioned also, food purchases can include both fresh and processed foods. So we had received a few questions about value-added products and if they'd be eligible, and they are eligible to participate in the program. Next slide, please. So there were several questions that we received on this topic, and I will try to cover them in the time allotted. The first question that we received, how late into the fall or winter will purchasing continue? As I mentioned, this is a 2-year grant that the department will receive. The first year in our initial discussions has really been looking at the logistics and the planning, as well as receiving proposals from partner organizations and those that wish to participate in the program. So purchasing will likely begin in the spring of 2023, just based upon the proposal to USDA, the turnaround time, and having the ability to allow farmers and those that are interested in the program to plan ahead to meet what they say they're going to do in their applications. So there's no saying when the purchasing will start, but we're certainly cognizant and mindful that farmers and those that wish to participate in the program have to plan their planting season and their crops to be able to meet the demands of the program. The next question, will the agreement cover ethnic crops that are produced in Massachusetts? Certainly ethnic crops would be eligible and would be encouraged as we're looking to serve underserved communities through this program. So depending on the needs of different regions and what those ethnic crops may be, for example, I know that Gilo and Cape Cod in the population on the Cape is one popular crop, and they may be looking to increase production of that and be able to produce that crop through this program and distribute it. So yes, ethnic crops are eligible and would be part of the program process. Inclusion of small farms and value-added products. And this was from a small cheesemaker in Western Mass. As I mentioned, value-added products would be eligible. So cheese and dairy products would be eligible for the program. The next question, would like to hear more about the aquacultural industry's participation in this program. Aquaculture certainly that's an area. It's actually the area in the state that's growing the fastest. And we know that the aquaculture industry was impacted during COVID due to restaurants closing and that being their primary market for fresh aquacultural products. So aquaculture would be eligible for the program. And again, we would encourage those partnerships to determine where the distribution would be and who you're partnering with for that. How will pricing be determined? Will there be contracts? How will the contract be determined? So pricing will really depend on the model that we end up looking towards developing. Today's session, as I mentioned, will help inform what an RFR process will look like for the department. But in terms of pricing, we anticipate that will be worked out with the different organizations that decide to collaborate, or in terms of a fair market price for your product if you're submitting an individual application, as there may be micro grants to farms or businesses that are not able to partner in their region. So we will want to make sure that there is a fair price given, and the contracts may be either through the lead agency if you're working in a collaborative model, or through the department. We would be administering the contract if such is the case of a micro grant. And then the last comment, barriers faced by school food service directors when trying to purchase locally produced food. So certainly that's another topic that we've heard a lot about. And we do have the Mass Farm to School network and the ability to work with them. But we have heard in terms of distributors and that process of working with them, it is challenging to get locally produced food. So through this program, there may be an opportunity through either a school system director to act as a partner organization in this process if they're interested in having local food or a certain type of crop through this program. So we are looking to build upon those partnerships, and that's one facet of this is schools and school children, as they may be in an underserved community. So that's definitely an area, and I see Sean put in the chat that they're working with Congressman McGovern's staff to address this. And I do know that the congressman has been committed to this as well, because if we can strengthen our school systems and get more local food into that, it will only benefit all of us. So that's great to hear. Thank you, Sean. I'm just trying to be mindful of time.
We have about 2 minutes. I think we can fit in one of these questions and then include the rest in the open comment period. So we had a question from Allie. Would the regional organization be responsible for billing and logistics, or would products be purchased and shipped from farms directly?
So in terms of that, Allie, and thank you for your question, I would anticipate the model would be that a contract is awarded through the department to the lead organization, and then that lead organization could subcontract with the farms that it's working with and be paid that route. But if anyone else from the MDAR team has any thoughts, I'd welcome those as well.
I think
you see we're getting more questions, but some of these I think will be addressed in our later topics as well.
I think we have time to answer one more. Buddy asked aquacultural and the underserved and urban areas. I wonder if that's asking if aquacultural falls under underserved urban areas.
So I might need some clarification on that, Buddy, but in terms of aquaculture, I mean, one such example, and we do have representatives on here from the Greater Boston Food Bank, was with the aquaculture industry. One way we were able to partner and collaborate and help that industry during the pandemic was with the production of a chowder that the food banks were able to give their clients. That was something that was very unique but it was a way to not only assist the aquaculture industry, but also to provide a new product and a really delicious, nutritious product to clients through the food bank and their food pantry partners. And I know the clients were really excited about that. So when we look at aquaculture, an aquaculturist may have oysters and they may partner with an organization to process those. And then the lead organization or the distributor may partner with them to look at a community in the greater Boston area or the greater Springfield area that may be in need of fresh seafood products and able to distribute it that way. So it's really building upon those connections and trying to identify the connections across not only a local region, but across the state. I think just given the time, we'll want to move on to the next topic. And again, we are taking note of all the questions that are coming into the chat. And I'll now turn it over to Rose.
Thank you, Ashley. So contracting with socially disadvantaged farmers. Considering the mandate set by the state for environmental justice and the work that Ashley spoke to earlier, I think this is such a fantastic opportunity to continue the momentum for expanding economic growth and building and sustaining marketing opportunities for historically disadvantaged farmers. This funding and how the program is shaped is really going to set a precedent. And how we do that work is really going to be about you and your input. So you can help us meet those expectations and inform our team. When we look at the slide, bullet number 2, we have to complete a report at the end of this program. So some of the information that we'll need to collect, how many of the vendors are from socially disadvantaged farmers or producers, the name of the vendor, where the vendor is located, the dollar value of the product, the experience of the awardees. There's lots of ways to measure this, and your input on how we can capture the experiences of the participants in this program is going to be important. So whether it's in the chat or after this session, your input on what should be included in this report would be very helpful. And then we have more questions. If you want to get to the next slide. Great. These are some of the questions that came in regarding this topic. And the procurement piece is going to be really important to address and also shape. The USDA has made it really clear that socially disadvantaged farmers and producers are the key with regards to sourcing and the distribution for this work. That said, we are still shaping what that looks like. And we're looking, again, going to hear it over and over, that we're looking through a lens of equity. There is flexibility with regards to procurement rules. And that contracting, it's going to be happening at a state level, and we're still navigating this. So I would say for the participants, what would for your input on this, like what are the strategies that you see would be beneficial for us to consider when we're shaping this within this application? The second bullet with regards to the balance on the focus for BIPOC, again, our intent with the design of the RFR is about maximizing the participation for historically disadvantaged farmers. So what I would do is ask the participants, potential awardees, Like, what do you believe is important within the design of this in this application? Like, what would the factors be that we want to ensure in the vetting process when it comes to the awardees? What do you consider fair and equitable? What I would also want to know from participants or potential awardees, like, what are the benchmarks that you feel would make sense to ensure balance? I mean, your input is going to be really important, and we'll gather all of that through this process and afterwards, and that will definitely guide us with that. The third bullet point, balancing a fair price. This part right here, I'm not an expert on, but absolutely farmers should be paid a fair price. But I would ask you, from your experiences, what is the criteria that would ensure this? So I'll stop there because I want to give people an opportunity to give their input.
Rose, I have a question from Amy. Why not have socially disadvantaged farmers apply directly to MDAR and then have the distributors select from the qualified farms before moving on to other farm sources?
Thanks for that. Thanks for that input.
And I would add to that, Amy, we're exploring all kinds of options for how we want to structure an RFR and what types of like open funding to distribute to either directly to farmers or organizations. So we really want to see what sort of input you guys have for that type of topic. So I really appreciate that. We have another question from Allie. Fair prices might differ for socially disadvantaged farmers as they might have less access to equipment, land, labor, and capital. So that's a note. Thank you very much, Allie, for that.
Mm-hmm. So so that would lead me to my next question regarding what are the challenges or what are past experiences for a smaller farm, an urban farm, immigrant farmers, like to fully participate? What would some of those challenges, and Ali just addressed some of that, but that we should be aware of?
Jennifer Hashley has also added, pricing and volume are also related. Smaller production means potentially higher costs as less economies of scale, for Allie's comment. Thank you, Jennifer.
So these are factors that when there are organizations that are thinking about being the lead, when you're thinking about your approach, is it hyperlocal? Is it regionally? We'll look at how this application is shaped and the program is shaped. But these are all considerations when you're looking at a network, when you're looking at partnering, when you're looking at the limitations. But also we want to think about the priorities of who we're serving, and whether it's cultural crops, low to moderate income communities, environmental justice communities, considering some of the adjustments that you may have to make when you're thinking about the entity you're putting together with regards to the distribution.
Thanks, Rose. We have two more comments from Allie and Jennifer, really providing really great input and discussion. Allie said, partnering with hyper-local farms is one thing that could help, but also paying a higher premium to BIPOC farmers or small or urban farmers. Thank you, Allie. Jennifer added, language barriers for invoicing, completing paperwork, communicating volumes, varieties, etc., to collaborators who are not set up to communicate effectively with non-English speakers who do not use technology such as computers or email. These are really, really fantastic comments.
I would add too that it would be really helpful for us to hear from all of you in terms of the resources that you feel that you would need to participate in this type of program, whether this particular program would address those resources or others. It's helpful for us to be mindful and aware of what you would all need.
Exactly. That was my last question. What kind of technical support would be required? I think Jennifer touched on that as well.
We have about 5 minutes left allotted for this time period, or this topic, excuse me. So please feel free to add anything or utilize the raised hand function. I'll give it a little bit longer, but if not, we can move on in a minute or so.
We want to hear your voices too, so feel free to use that raise hand feature and unmute.
We had another comment from Jennifer. This is where the human resource side of folks to support the farmers and be the technical assistant liaison to facilitate access is key. And this is people, salaries, FTE, business technical assistance. Thank you, Jennifer. And I think I will touch on that in the next topic as well. Growing Places had a comment. Marketing and communication is an important consideration to make successful and should be included in the funding or TA. We had Dylan Frazier. Crop planning, growing contracts, and pre-season commitments will be key to the success of supporting BIPOC farmers. And looks like a lot of agreement there. Allie mentioned if you fund these positions for 2 years and then it disappears, it's not a sustainable program. Thank you, Allie, Jennifer, Dylan, Growing Places, for all of your really great comments and input.
Okay, I guess I'll hand it off to you, Carrie.
Great. Okay, so I will be discussing program spending. Always a fun topic to go over the money. So with this program, the expectation is for recipients to spend most of the money, or a predominance of the money, on food purchases. Food purchases can include both fresh and processed food. All food purchase must meet the definition of domestically produced, as well as the definition of local that was mentioned earlier. Funds may also be used to cover the activities associated with program development, administration, food storage, and food distribution. If we could go to the next slide. So with that in mind, knowing that a predominance of the money needs to go to food purchases, but you can spend money on administration, development, capacity, those kinds of things, that allows for some spending on salaries, those typical cost categories of salaries, fringe, indirect, supplies, and there's a category called other, which is kind of like a catch-all category. There's also equipment. USDA does have some restrictions on equipment purchases. Equipment is considered anything that's $5,000 or higher. They allow for rental of equipment through the life of the grant, but have a little bit stricter requirements when it comes to actually purchasing of equipment, but that's something I could follow up on at a later point in time with anyone that's interested. Some of the comments and questions we received beforehand, which were great questions. What resources are available to farmers that are in need of staffing? So like I said, there would be some flexibility with requesting spending for salaries and even contractual costs. That's one of the cost categories as well. What forms of funding are available to organizations to operate increased programming? Like I said, you will be able to request some funding to assist with program development and for that programming aspect and outreach. Can the funds be used for land acquisition? can the funds be used for community gardening space? Funds cannot be used for land acquisition, unfortunately. And funds to be used for community gardening space, I might need a follow-up or clarification for that question, depending on if that community gardening is producing food to be sold, possibly. I might just want to check in with that person who asked that particular question. So in going over these kinds of questions, what I think we at MDAR want to know really are, what are the costs that you think would be associated with running a food purchasing and or distribution program such as this? Or what are the types of costs that you see would really be helpful to underserved communities, BIPOC farmers, and socially disadvantaged farmers? I've been away from the chat for a little bit, so I might need some help with catching up on that.
Sure, Carrie, I can give you a hand here. So we had a lot of great comments coming in. Some of these will be for the general open-ended comment section. We did have one comment come in from Allie Jacobs. As touched on earlier, in order for some buyers, schools specifically, to get produce from local vendors, they would need to go through a processing step. So while money to buy food is great, the funding to process is also very important in order to make this work. A lot of these processing steps are inaccessible to socially disadvantaged farmers, and the regional organizations might not be set up as food hubs and processors. So this is a great comment. Thank you for providing that. And it kind of goes back to our topic on product purchasing, that more than just fresh produce is eligible through this program, but other value-added products and meals as well. Carrie, I don't know if you wanted to jump in on the funding aspect of that question, or comment rather.
I think it's a really great and valuable comment that we'll take into consideration when developing the RFR.
And then I think that some of these other comments might fall into the open comment period as well, so we'll be sure to capture those. Are there any questions related to allowable costs or program spending?
Again, thank you for everyone's comments so far. They've been really, really incredible.
And our colleague David provided some clarity around schools from USDA. LFPA recipients can include schools as food distribution points. However, the food distributed is not intended to supplement the National School Lunch Program. And then Jennifer Hashley provided another comment here to answer what costs would be associated: staffing to support coordination and training, support to farmers with crop planning, ordering, food safety training, etc. Software licensing support to coordinate multi-farm and multiple market channels, warehouse space, electricity for cooling, storage, delivery drivers, packaging, boxes for deliveries. So very helpful information there. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yes, I'd like to echo that. Thank you so much, Jennifer. These are all really helpful for us to kind of wrap our heads around what, the general public or organizations or even individuals are looking for. And that really helps us when we're helping, applicants with questions about budgets. So I really, really appreciate it.
And I think we should, just looking at the time here, move on to the next topic, if that's all right. And we can take any other questions in the open-ended comment section as well. So thank you very much, Carrie, for going through that and for fielding those. Our next topic is topic 5, Farmers to Families Food Box Program. So USDA has indicated that the LFPA Cooperative Agreement Program builds upon lessons learned from the Farmers to Families Food Box Program. In particular, this program allows states to play a more defined role in designing a procurement and distribution program. So at this time, I'd like to welcome previous participants in the Farmers to Families Food Box program to share their experiences, challenges, lessons learned from participating in the program. We do have 10 minutes available for this section, and we'd appreciate hearing your insights to learn how we can make this effective, equitable, and successful. So I see there's a hand raised. Catherine, I believe that you can unmute yourself. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, I just, we were probably one of the largest purchasers through the Families to Food Box program in Massachusetts. And I'm sure there's a lot of data and information we can share. There was actually some formal testimony and comments that we sent to USDA that I think might be helpful that we can share and pass along. So I won't go into all those details, but just, I guess the most important piece from our perspective is understanding where food is going. So that was one of the, I think, biggest challenges in terms of just understanding need and demand and what was out there. We were distributing a lot of the boxes ourselves to our network of 600 partners. The other food banks in the state, 3 other food banks who also distribute TFAP food, were doing the same. And then many of our larger partners were actually direct contracting. And I think in the form of that program, that actually was a really good method to just contract directly with the producer. And that might be the best as you guys consider this going forward. But I think for us, just understanding and tracking where food was going in the community as we want to understand, resource allocation and where the needs and the gaps really are in communities. So that's probably the most important piece, although there's probably a lot around procurement and distribution and contracting that I can share just via some of our testimonial comments to USDA.
Great. Thank you very much, Catherine, for sharing that. And this is one element that we are excited that this is at the state level so that we can lean on our partnerships with state agencies and begin to explore how we engage with state agencies to have a handle on where this food is being distributed to. I see another hand. Julia, I welcome you to unmute so that you can share your comment.
Hi there. So we were one of the few Massachusetts-based contractors awarded a contract in the first few rounds of the Farmers to Family Food Box program. We worked exclusively with the Food Bank of Western Mass, and we bid conservatively and found that we would have had a much higher capacity. However, we really followed the spirit of the program and offered last mile delivery and sourced directly from other local farms and producers, as well as incorporating our own products into it. And we found in subsequent rounds of the program that worked against us. The subsequent contracts were awarded to much larger out-of-state bidders. So I'm happy to see this move forward and happy to be available for any to answer any specific logistical questions.
Thank you, Julia. Appreciate your comment and sharing your experience. Dylan?
Yeah, Dylan Frazier from Boston Area Gleaners. We participated in every round of the USDA box program, and in the beginning, it was the intentions were, I think, right on, where it was mostly produce in a box, and the vendors or packers were supposed to be providing distribution. But by the end of the program, each round had tournament style bidding, so the price point on the box kept getting lower and lower, and the quality of ingredients in these boxes, even though we were doing the trucking, the final mile for other contractors throughout the whole program, the quality got so poor. And just because these big conglomerate packers had to, put in the cheapest ingredients. So Demand for the boxes kind of dwindled as quality got more inferior. The box program was a huge success, though, given the stress that the pandemic put on a lot of these communities. So I can tell you firsthand the lines of 1,000, 2,000 people waiting to get these boxes every week in all kinds of inner city neighborhoods. So I think the USDA did not put enough enforcement on the final mile delivery or the costs associated with that. And they overlooked the infrastructure challenges that these pop-up pantries have. They don't have cold storage, they don't have loading docks, and they don't have equipment to move pallets. So that challenge fell to us to figure out how to make it happen, but I'll let other folks chime in here.
Thank you for your comments, Dylan, much appreciated. And we have another hand raised. Karen, could you unmute, please?
Hello. Oh, I suppose I should turn my camera. Hi, I'm calling because I'm a member of the local town Lincoln's Agricultural Commission. And for the last 2 years, we have been using part of our budget, we don't have a large town budget, to pay local farmers to deliver food to the food pantry. This is the St. Vincent de Paul Lincoln Weston Food Pantry, which, according to the person running the pantry, has been a great success. So my question is, is it likely that an agricultural commission could get funding to distribute to the local farms? There was no cost associated. We knew all the local farmers. They delivered the food. To the extent that there would have been a grant proposal, we would have been able to handle that. That is one thing we have run into with new farmers, whether or not they are socially disadvantaged, was that, as someone already pointed out, there's a big barrier in filling out government proposal paperwork. But it worked really efficiently. I mean, it didn't cost anything. We just delivered the money directly to the farmers and they delivered the food. The pantry had refrigeration and so forth. And these were all local, so they're within a few miles of the pantry.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for both your comment and your question. At this point, we're exploring different models and just trying to weigh what's going to be, most feasible with the number of contracts that we would be managing, but also making sure that all communities are reached. I welcome my other MDAR colleagues to jump in here to field that question as well.
Rebecca, and Karen, and so you might have to share your screen again. I apologize. I'm not sure if we can see the slides right now.
I can see a slide.
It still says sharing on my end, so I think we're still okay.
Great.
But thank you for your comment and your question, Karen. And as more details are developed, then with the program, we'll certainly be able to answer the granularity of entities that would be able to apply for the program. So thank you. Okay, I see another hand raised. Jessie Gill, could you please unmute?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. Jessie Gill, World Farmers. We were one of the original food box contractors as well, Massachusetts based. We collaborated with all Massachusetts farmers, and with the exception of 1 week at the very beginning where we had to source from New Jersey. And the majority of the farmers that we supported through the program were, as USDA terms, socially disadvantaged, immigrant and refugee farmers. The food box program was so important for market stability for the farmers in our program, and also the other small scale farmers we were able to connect with and facilitate sales for throughout the North Central area, and even further out into Western Mass as well. I would say for us, some of what has already been shared is true. The price point was huge. So we were priced out of the contract for the next couple rounds. Price for small scale farmers is really, really important to be able to make sure that they're making a living wage. So this should not be a donation on their part. It should be an actual market opportunity. So that pricing, flexibility, and also not making price to the farmer for food purchasing, a key piece in your evaluation would be really, really important. Also, I would strongly recommend that any folks you're engaging with must already have their community partners secured. So, and have already started to talk with folks about where the boxes are going, how many they feel they can field, and those logistics are really important. They were also totally unfunded in the contract, the work of the community partners, because if we're really trying to hit the gaps of program areas that emergency food isn't hitting yet, then it is going to be more ad hoc, more grassroots initiatives. And some of that is through sustainable programs that have been operating for a while, and it'll be like a grace and a kindness to receive these boxes or crops. But for some folks, they are mobilizing on the ground to really create this distribution process to really hit those communities most needed. And Julia, you touched on that when you said you did last mile delivery. So allowing for a portion for those community partners would be really important. And there was another piece. I think flexibility in how the partner crafts the program. So for some folks, a box makes sense. For other people, it doesn't. And so allowing through that planning process with community partners, allowing the contract agency to have crafted a like multi-pronged approach to getting produce to the hungry would be really, really important.
Great.
And that's all for now.
Thank you very much for your comments. And, we're hearing the value of flexibility in a lot of these areas. So I appreciate that. And let's see, are there other, I think perhaps we may need to move on to the next topic.
I wanted to give a time warning, but I have noted that Julia Coffey has their hand up and we can come back during the open comment period.
I believe I took Julia's comment earlier. Perhaps that's just, okay. I see Julia.
Okay, great. Thank you. I apologize.
No, it's hard to remember to take your hand down after you've raised it. So no worries there. Okay. We are going to move on to the next topic of distribution. And we do want to leave enough time for the open comment period. So we may not be able to allot the full 10 minutes, but we will be able to take comments on this as well. So we've touched heavily on procurement, but the distribution side of this program is equally important. A central goal of this program is to establish and broaden partnerships between farmers, producers, and the food distribution community to ensure distribution of fresh and nutritious foods in rural, remote, or underserved communities. And we heard a definition of underserved communities earlier in the presentation, but there's a real focus on equity in this program. So here are some comments and questions that we received on the topic of distribution. What support is given to distribution centers? Because we are in the exploration phase, we don't have concrete information in terms of what financial support for distribution will look like. That being said, the RFA does state that funds may be used to cover activities associated with food distribution. So we are carefully reading that RFA and taking note of all of the flexibility that it affords. That end, it would be helpful for us to hear from the group, either in the chat or in comments, what types of support would you need for success? We also received a comment highlighting potential collaborative opportunities between urban, peri-urban, rural, and regional facets of our food systems. We agree, as does USDA, that this is a key opportunity for this program. How can MDAR help leverage those partnerships is what we want to hear from you. Since the pandemic, we've seen new innovative collaborations across the food space with partners like Mass in Motion, DESI. We've seen existing collaborations with PTA, WIC, Elder Affairs strengthened and expanded. And so it's helpful for us to know, again, how can we help leverage those partnerships? We also received the question, what types of organizations will be distributing the produce and what types of partnerships? And so we want to know from you, what types of partnerships do you feel would lead to success for distributing food. And finally, it would be really helpful for us to know any gaps in food distribution that you know of. That's a real key element of this program, is to make sure that we are highlighting and really reaching the full state and making sure that we're reaching underserved communities who may not be reached by our traditional programs. So any comments that we've had in the chat, or any hands raised? I can't see too easily right now.
I don't see any hands raised. We have had a lot of really great comments already on the distribution topic, but if anybody would love to add any more input or comments or questions, we have about 5 minutes or so.
So I think my somebody mentioned that there was a comment earlier about distribution, perhaps from Dave Dumaras.
Rebecca, this is David Weber. I can read that. I have it up.
Thank you, David.
The comment was, in an effort to shorten the supply chain itself and strengthen a resilient food system, could the production and distribution be on and at the farms themselves? Massachusetts is a densely populated state, and most of the population is close proximity to the farms themselves. Many farms are located in food deserts.
Thank you for reading that out, David, and thank you for the comment as well, and the feedback. If anyone on the MDAR team wants to respond, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we will, I see a hand is raised here.
I also echo, thank you, David, for that question. As far as answering it, I think us at MDAR, we would take that more as a comment saying that that's something that's requested by the public, and we would take note of that.
Thank you, Carrie. Should we move to Dylan, has his hand raised. Dylan, do you want to unmute?
Yeah. My comment would just be like that the relationships between these organizations, the distribution points and the producers and everybody involved, it'd be nice if there was more lead time to plan this on a seasonal basis, so that it reflects the nature of the growing season, crop planning, and the changes in what we can produce in the state locally for our own communities. A lot of these programs, the timeline doesn't match up with the growing season. Either we have to scramble and get it in action long before the growing season really starts, or too late, and it doesn't reflect the nature of agriculture in this region. So I just suggest that we take that into consideration.
Thank you very much, Dylan, for your comment. We did get a comment in the chat related to distribution as well, and then I will move to Hannah. I see a raised hand. So Margaret Christie commented, I'm curious about input from this group about how or whether these funds could be used to support and stabilize farmers markets. These are often important outlets for small and new farmers, and as HIP access points are already often important food access points, depending in part on location. However, farmers market managers are already doing far too much for too little money and don't really have the capacity to add new tasks, organizing procurement boxes, etc., without funding more of their time. Thank you for that comment, Margaret. We do have an extensive network of farmers markets, over 200 in our state, that are well-versed in both food access, food security, and food distribution, with so many novel, innovative systems that we saw during the pandemic. So I appreciate your comment, and we will definitely consider all of these. Hand raised.
I think we had a couple questions in the chat before that one.
Okay.
Apologies. There was a question from Kelsey. Is it possible for the end food recipients to receive a note from the producers who produce the food and or a description of the farms? This would require keeping track of where everything came from, but wouldn't necessarily require extra packaging. Maintaining the human connection is important.
Thank you for that comment, Kelsey.
That's a good question. I think I would have to follow up with that one and take some time to think about it, Kelsey. We also had a question from Karen. Will nonprofit farms be eligible for funding? Answer to that is yes. And then I think we can go to the hand raised.
Thank you, Carrie. Hannah, please unmute when you're ready.
Thanks. Hi. Let me take my hand down while I'm thinking of it. I really appreciate this distribution question for the group. And I was just about to type a question out about using the funding effectively. And I think distribution is a really great way to look at the farm and just community networks that can be tapped into in order to use this money most efficiently. Looking at, for example, where wasted food goes and making sure that we're doing the most that we can with our wasted foods, because as much as we want all this food to be eaten, it does go to, compost landfills, and hopefully maybe we can get it to some animal farms or whatever it might be. And then just thinking about supporting farmer networks and getting organized on the community side of things, because hopefully if we're more intentional with the way that we support our farmers and farm communities, it will be a little bit more generative, with the ability to basically just spark longer lasting programming. So yeah, just recommending a very intentional, efficient and collaborative way of looking at distribution to boost community resiliency and partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Hannah. And it's something that is definitely on our mind, as our Deputy Commissioner mentioned earlier, just that focus on longevity is really important to us. So I see another hand raised, and I think that will be our last comment before moving on to the next topic, because we are somewhat running out of time on this topic. But please unmute, Catherine. Thank you.
Thanks, and hopefully this is my last comment. I think this just built on actually some of the other comments that have already been made, but my last comment about just tracking of where sort of food is going within communities. I actually think that what the last person just said about, there being an infrastructure here around the farming community, I think just to highlight, there is a pretty robust infrastructure around emergency food. And while I think the intent of this program is to sort of think outside the box, I think thinking about the infrastructures that are in place and how they're perhaps connecting them a little bit stronger at the local level. I mean, we've got 1,000 emergency food distribution partners across the state that are being serviced by the four food banks. But how are those partners coordinating at the local level and distributing and with farmers markets? I think that there is a real opportunity there, but I want to make sure. I just would want to really make sure that in the sake of longevity and sustainability, that we do look at sort of our existing infrastructure, and just thinking about other states, that infrastructure doesn't exist like we have in Massachusetts. And so just, building on the strengths here in our state and figuring out how to make those systems a little bit more connected.
Great. Thank you for that comment. And I think it segues really nicely into our next topic. We pride ourselves in Massachusetts on those connections, on all the work that we do, the distribution networks that we have. And we know, I'm just going to move to the next slide here, that effective and collaborative outreach and engagement will be key to ensuring program success. And we want to learn about what effective outreach looks like to you and learn what we can do as MDAR to support those efforts. So we received the following comment on this topic. How can municipalities make their residents and agricultural property owners more aware of this initiative? So we, as a state, really lean on our regional networks. We have great regional buy local organizations, as well as the Farm and Market Report is another outlet that we encourage everyone to subscribe to, as we'll be sending e-blasts regarding program opportunities through our Farm and Market Report. And we can put a link to that in the chat for folks to sign up and subscribe. I also want to mention that through our agency's environmental justice efforts, led by Rose Arruda, we are working to intentionally expand our channels and strengthen community engagement activities. We learned a lot about leveraging local level entities through our Healthy Incentives program, which is our electronic SNAP matching program, and through our Farmers Market Nutrition program work. And we'd also like to hear from you about what else you need in this space. So it would be great to hear feedback on outreach and awareness in general, but specifically, what outreach methods have you seen success with, or do you think would be successful at connecting farmers with their communities? And when we think about those connections from the farmers to perhaps regional distribution and to the communities themselves and the residents. And thank you, David, for putting that link in the chat. So what can MDAR do to help make those connections, to help foster collaboration between farmers, between distribution programs, between community nutrition programs? Okay, I think we see something in the chat. It would be great if you'd keep the agricultural commissions informed. They're supposed to promote and support farming in their respective towns and to educate communities about farming, etc. Thank you for that input, Karen. From Jennifer, we host an annual open farms tour for the public to visit the incubator farm and food hub to meet the farmers. Sounds like a great way to connect the community with farmers. Ali Jacobs' successful outreach goes through existing community relationships, such as senior centers, community health centers, and other similar programs. Thank you for that. And we at MDAR, we have through our Farmers Market Nutrition program where we distribute coupons to seniors, have access to a network of senior centers with clinics. And so it's great to know how you all would want help facilitating those connections. Jay Huntington Chase, suggestions for connection in rural areas without internet connections. Thank you for that as well. I remember visiting the hill towns and speaking about this issue. And it is important to us at MDAR to make sure that programs are accessible. And I welcome my MDAR colleagues to address this, or we can follow up as well about making sure that any communication and information is available not only through online means. Margaret Moulton, I would love to hear more about the choice-based purchasing options mentioned in comments. If folks would like to share email addresses, we can figure out how to create a listserv if that's something that's helpful. Put that in any post-evaluation comments for us to help facilitate local level connections. Okay, great. So this was our last topic before we move into the open-ended comment period. And so I think we are going to move on unless there are other comments or raised hands that I'm missing for this section.
We did have one more comment just come in from Jesse. As a way to build knowledge and confidence in the kitchen, We included recipes in all of the food boxes. Also, some of the community partners used time they were distributing food boxes to engage with the end recipient, educate about HIP, many of whom were SNAP recipients, but who did not know about HIP. Any additional funding offered to community partners for this kind of education and outreach would be well-spent state money as match.
It's a great comment, and something that we're always looking to do, and as foster those cross-posting and cross-outreach efforts that we can do. So thank you for that. Okay, so I think we're going to move into the open-ended comment period. And what we're going to do here is welcome the raised hand feature as well. Let's see, I just want to keep an eye on the time. We have about 20 minutes left for this particular section before we're going to do closing remarks. So if you would like to raise your hand, or what we can do is go back to the comments that we received and address those one at a time as well.
I did have some from previously in the presentation that we can kind of go over, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer Hashley asked how much administrative costs, overhead will be allowed as part of the process to cover grant compliance, invoicing, etc., beyond the cost of food procurement expenses. In terms of overhead costs, I think we'll still have to kind of consider that. We will have administrative costs as allowable, unlike some other programs we have like specialty crops, but we have to kind of work internally to determine what that'll be, what the limit will be. But beyond that, we have, administrative costs like salary, fringe, all of those will be allowable. So I'm going back and forth between this and my Word document. So just let me know if anybody raises their hands or has any additional questions. I'll just continue with the next one I have. Margaret Christie, I think it will be important to understand more clearly what preponderance really means. The list of needed support for production, procurement, and distribution that's been generated is very good, and understanding what's really possible under the terms of the agreement will be important for writing budgets and applications. I agree, Margaret. I think I can follow up with USDA to see exactly what their definition of, predominantly produce would include. And I agree with the rest of your comment. Just checking in. Annie said, education on quality standards can vary with farmers. This is something to consider when partnering with new farmers. Will there be any form of insurance for the farms if the crops fail due to a variety of reasons, like weather, pests, etc.? That's a great question, Annie, and thank you for it. Off the top of my head, I believe that costs like insurance are unallowable. I would want to follow up with USDA to confirm that, and I can follow up and provide the answer for you as well. Just checking back in. Okay, great. I have a question from Margaret again. When we get to distribution, a question is, maybe we answered this one, just let me know. Could the distribution issues be covered by funding for mobile food pantry refrigerated vehicles, particularly in rural areas? Did we address this question already?
We did not address that question yet.
Great. I believe that there is funding for storage and capacity. So I would want to, this is another follow-up I would have with USDA to see if refrigerated vehicles would fall under that. I believe it would, but not to give a hard answer. I just want to follow up, and I'll make sure I get back to you with that, Margaret.
I think too, as far as that question, because it seems to have come up quite a bit with allowable costs, and correct me, Carrie, but as we digest all of these comments and all the resources that are needed to implement this program successfully, we will be taking a look at the structure of any RFR associated to see more and have more information about what % of costs could go towards equipment or that type of cost.
And then we had a question about, I think another question about distribution. Again, let me know if this has already been answered. From Kelsey, is it possible for the end food recipients to receive a note from the producers who produce the food? I do
That
remember.
was covered, yeah.
Okay. I think that covers questions I had been tracking. I apologize if I did not capture it. Please feel free to ask any questions that you might have posted in the chat prior or would like us to answer now.
So there is a comment from Jesse Gill. Would be great if MDR could offer a bit of matchmaking. Farmers could fill out a simple form stating location and selection of crops during what season, and potential LFPA applicants could scan the list to do outreach to farmers in their region. Thank you for that feedback, Jesse. We have been talking about our Mass Grown Farm Exchange, which is our new platform, and any potential opportunities that this intersects with as far as the Mass Grown Exchange. Okay, it is still possible to apply for the program? If so, how a farmer who does not have computers can apply for the program? Thank you for that comment, Alexander. We will definitely be evaluating how to make any applications as accessible as possible. And if other MDR staff want to chime in on that, feel free.
As for being able to apply for the program, the RFR, which is a request for response, which is the mechanism you would respond to, is still in development, which is why this listening session is really helpful, because it's providing input for that RFR. That has not been posted yet, so the application period will be at a later date and time, Alex.
Great. Tanya with Farmington Institution New England. In some other calls I've attended, other states noted a process of asset mapping that can help identify existing networks, effective communication outlets, and proactively address potential gaps or weaknesses that would affect. I think maybe it got cut off there. We have begun an asset map internally, and we really thank all of you for your comments, as they will help feed our asset map and help us flesh that out. Again, we have our additional comment form that we'll be sending out. So any feedback that you have through there on what existing programs we could leverage, please let us know. Another question, comment about adopting the Mass Grown Exchange online platform to coordinate a choice-based food distribution program, both before the season, suggestions for producers from recipients, and when food is available. Individuals select the items they would like and can check out using a special code through the program. Maybe add a non-online version that people could access at existing food distribution points. Thank you, Kelsey, for that detailed comment. We will take that back and consider it, and also check in with our Mass Grown Exchange team on that. Also, I understand from Tanya, I understand that federally recognized tribes can apply separately from state agencies. Is there some coordination in Massachusetts between MDR and tribes? So we did explore this initially. I don't know if other MDR staff on the call have any input in this regard in the coordination between MDR and tribes.
As part of this process, we will be connecting with tribal nations and just getting those key contacts to understand where we both might be able to leverage these resources. and involve them in the process.
Great, thank you, Ashley. We had an endorsement of suggestions from Dee to Kelsey. Before using funds to create new distribution channels, it seems like we should explore existing channels like the farmers market suggestion, as well as existing farm stands, food banks, mobile and brick and mortar, etc. Thank you for that comment. Karen has a question. How are you weighing the benefit to the people eating the food versus the benefit to the producers of the food? We can get more food per dollar cost from some farms than others. As has been observed, small farms often have fewer economies of scale. Non-profit farms have a clear edge. I don't know if any MDR staff want to chime in, or we can follow up on that comment or question after the call.
I think the USDA really wants states to measure, how many connections are being made, distribution channels, and how we're really helping those communities. So those will kind of be the measurements that we'll be looking at or working with organizations to really track.
There was another question. Do tribes have to be federally recognized tribes as it is federal money? I believe in order to be applicants to the program, they do, but if other MDR staff want to chime in on that point.
Hi, it's Rose. I believe that is the case, Rebecca.
But that, as our deputy commissioner said, that doesn't preclude us from establishing relationships and, making sure that we are connecting with the Massachusetts tribal governments. A logistics comment from Liz: helpful if future communications could be sent well in advance of the scheduled date. Reminded of the event well into the presentation. Reminded 5 other BIPOC farmers who are also not sitting in front of the computer. Okay, thank you, Liz, for your feedback and comments. We will take those into consideration for future events and future listening sessions. The recording will be shared to everyone who registered, and we're also determining the best way to make that recording publicly available. Okay. So there's a question about attendees turning on their videos. We don't want to require anybody to turn on their videos, so I'm just going to move on from that comment. Any other comments? We have just a few minutes left before we're going to close the session.
Rebecca, this is Ashley, and I would just add to, we've received so many great comments, and a lot of these make me think of the work from the Food Security Task Force, the Mass Grown Exchange, and how we've built those partnerships, as well as the Food Security Infrastructure Grant Program. Many of you have cited that we have the infrastructure in place, or we're working towards strengthening our infrastructure through the Food Security Infrastructure Grant Program. And I also know some of the individuals on the call have participated in collaborative models that came about as a result of the pandemic, whether it was delivery services or adapting their businesses to online models. And so it would be great in this post survey that we send out if we could hear more about some of those models. One such example of an individual that came on the call reminded me of the Sunderland Food Collaborative and the way that all of those partnerships were formed, and they were able to reach farmers, and not only farmers, but different businesses across the ag community in their region, as well as underserved communities, and expand that outreach through that model. So there's so many great individuals on this call today with so many learned experiences and different lessons learned from the pandemic and pre-pandemic that I think will really help us as we develop this program. And I so appreciate all the comments and feedback that we've received so far.
Thank you, Ashley. So I'm not seeing any additional comments come in through the chat. And I'm not seeing any hands raised. So at this time, I think we're going to begin to close out the listening session. I'll give folks another few seconds to chime in or raise their hand. So in the chat, we are going to put a link to the closeout form. I want to thank you all for your thoughtful and insightful comments. They are tremendously helpful. And we appreciate your time that you took this evening to be with us and share those comments. And I will now pass it over to Ashley Randall, our Deputy Commissioner, for closing words.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I would just echo Rebecca's sentiments and thanks to all of you for participating, all of your thoughtful and candid feedback that you provided to our team today. We really appreciate the partnership and collaboration, and for some of us, new introductions on this call. So it's great to make your connection, and we really appreciate you joining us for 2 hours, being mindful of everyone's time. But we do know that all of your feedback is critical as we develop this program. As we said earlier, it is a learning process for all of us, and there have been a lot of shared experiences and learned experiences that you provided us today that will be helpful as we develop our application to USDA, and really focusing on that equity lens and looking at our food system as we work to develop a successful model for the LFPA program. I'd also really like to thank our MDAR team for all of the time and planning resources that went in today's session. They are such a great team, and I feel so honored to work with all of them. As you can see, they're also a very impressive team. So we're fortunate to have all of them on today's call and assisting as we develop the LFPA program. Please take a few minutes, as Rebecca mentioned, to complete the follow-up survey, and don't hesitate to reach out to our team with any questions or additional thoughts that you may have. So thank you all again for joining us, and have a great